Okay, hello everybody. Today is March 16th. It is the monthly mock meeting, and the recording has started. Okay, we're going to jump right into just the read-only agenda items. There is a light hotspot update that is targeted for March 21st, so it will be next week for the second batch of light hotspots. Just that update there. There's no additional things unless Sophie wants to add anything to the light hotspot.
Yep, we're on track.
Okay, perfect. And then the other agenda item is Jameson from CalChip is going to be joining the MOC. And we just want to say thank you for joining. Welcome. And if you want to do a quick intro.
Sure. Thanks, Christina. My name is Jameson Buffmeyer. I'm currently serving as Vice President of Decentralized Wireless at CalChip Connect. We're an IoT distributor, but I've had a career in telecom of over 10 years in corporate strategy and business development, and followed Helium from the early days. Was very, very excited by their pivot to blockchain and decentralization, and have been an active community member since the beginning. So happy to be here to help contribute. Very excited to bring more folks into the Helium ecosystem.
Yeah, we should add that Jameson's a non-voting member. We have going to be trying to fill in the have advisors, people sit in and be part of the meetings and talk about how things affect them. But when it comes to voting on manufacturers, since CalChip is also a distributor of hotspots, I want to make that clear that that's what the role is. Cool. All right. Well, I guess it's over to me now. We got those two read-only status items, and first thing up for discussion is what to do with manufacturers changing hardware. You know, what constitutes a significant enough change that requires a re-audit, what things are okay to change without re-audit but required notices. Do we get involved in significant changes need to be communicated to customers in some way? All of these wonderful things. Sophie, were you the one to bring this up? Do you remember who kind of was driving this? You know, it's a question we've been having internally on our discussions. So I do know one thing that we did talk about is a change in the concentrator. You know, Semtech has really three main concentrators out right now. There's three generations of the SX1301, which is what the very first hotspots came out with, at least in terms of Helium's original hotspots. Then the 1302, which has uses the upgraded, Patrick, correct me, 1257 radios, which have a little bit more sensitivity and a lot less power usage. And then there's the 1303, which again uses the same radios, but has some extra features in it. It can allow you to do true GPS timestamping, things like that.
Yes. So let me correct you there. Sorry, the new chips are the 1250. The older ones are the 1257s.
Okay. Very good.
Let's, Patrick, let me add just even more
that's
clarity,
fine.
because there's actually two different sets of chips here.
Yes.
Right. So there's the baseband chipset, which is the SX1301 or the 1302/1303.
Yeah.
So
there's even an 08.
Right. So there's actually two generations of baseband chipset, the 1301/1308. And then the second generation, the newer generation, is the 1302/1303. The 1302s and 3s are pin-for-pin compatible. And, you know, that's kind of what generally Semtech would recommend for new designs. But there's inventory of the older ones that you still see in the market. There are different chips, which are referred to as the analog front-end chips, which are the SX1257s and the SX1250s. So both of those analog front-end chips can be used with either of the back end of the baseband chips. So in these designs, you do see people mix and match those combos. But most commonly, what's seen in the market is the older generation design, which is a 1301 or 1308 with a 1257. And then the newer generation, what they call the Corso reference designs, which are the 1302/1303 on the baseband with the 1250s. So those are kind of the common PCIe reference cards you see in the market.
And just to add, Nick put some numbers in the channel to make things even more confusing, but perhaps actually to help make them less confusing. Rack sells some of these parts combined together. They sell their distribution of it, and those are sometimes called the 2247, which is an SX1301, and the 2287, which is Rack's 1302. So if everyone's familiar with all those numbers, out of the way, each of these has different flavors. They have different capabilities in the radio. And we are concerned generally in trying to get the best quality radios out there to the hotspots. And so that is generally the 1302 and 1303. And we've had cases where manufacturers have said in their HIP 19 application that they will be using a 1302, the newer one, and shipped a few units that actually had 1308s, which are the older generation. So we're concerned about that. We're wondering what we should do, and what we should make manufacturers do. And
Yeah,
Sophie,
Jeremy, let me
go ahead.
at least add my opinion on this, right? So you are correct. There are some slight spec differences between these generations of chipset, but my personal opinion is most Helium customers will not see a real world performance difference based on the components used in the design. You're in the noise margins of sensitivity on the differences. So what will likely yield a real world performance difference in terms of design is how well the company implemented and manufactured the design, how well they did their matching circuit, how well they've tuned their antenna to go with this thing, right? So I want to caution the Helium community to be like, oh, I have a 1308 product, it's somehow not performing as well. That's probably not true. I am concerned about the fact that manufacturers may be swapping in different versions of these radio modules without having the proper CE or FCC updates. So I think that's the bigger concern for me is like, you can't just change a 1308 radio module and for a 1302, it will require a different FCC test and FCC ID. So if you're a product manufacturer and you have different batches of these products going out with different configurations of these radio cards, and you're not properly following your FCC license, then that's the bigger area of concern in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's right. One little tidbit of sort of useless information, maybe, I don't know. That rack 2287, that was actually designed almost by Helium. So Helium engineers actually worked on that, and they went above and beyond our core cell design. They actually are running differential signals between our 1250s and the 1302, which we don't even do on our own design. They changed the front end module or the second stage amplifier to a different one to get a little bit better performance. So that's actually a really good product. That product is in most of the OGs, the original hotspots. So just FYI.
Yeah. Well, we do ask about the concentrator though on the HIP 19 application, and I wonder what the purpose of that is. Should we stop asking about it if it doesn't really matter, or if we do ask about it, what do we do with it? How do we make it an actionable item? What's the point?
The only reason I think I pushed to ask for that is because the supply on the 01s and 08s is severely constrained and won't get any better. And that's why Semtech really does not recommend any new designs with those chips. They're built in a different fab where we have very little clout, so to say. We hardly build any other product in that fab. So we basically don't, we don't get any additional wafer allocations, as opposed to the 1302 and 1303, they're built in a different fab where we have lots of clout and have been able to actually substantially increase the wafer output. We've actually doubled our test. We had actually a test limitation, so we've doubled our test output. So we're shipping a pretty crazy amount of parts these days. So
yeah. So Patrick, I think it's pretty simple. For any new design, the 1302 or 1303 is recommended. Most of those will use the 1250s as the analog front end, although there are some designs that may still go with the 1257, which is perfectly fine.
yes.
In terms of the HIP 19 applications from manufacturers, they just need to build what they say they're going to build. right? I think that's the main requirement. If you and I think you should know which chipset you're going to use before you submit an application for approval of a design. And if you submit your application and do your FCC testing with one version of this radio card, then that's fine. You can go to production with it and you don't have to do anything else. But if you change that radio card, you have to go back and update your FCC CE filings, and indicate that you have the proper ID, and the MOC needs to be notified that it becomes like a version 2 of the product, right? There is version 1, which used this combination of radios. We're going to do a version 2 of the product with this kind. That's fine. But they have to notify the MOC, so it's on file, and they really need to go update their own FCC and CE filings so that they stay compliant.
Yeah, and several months ago, we did a list of things that would trigger a need to re-audit. One of it was if you reduce the memory, etc. One of them, it's if you do anything that requires a new certification, it would have to be resubmitted for an audit. If this requires a new FCC certification, it automatically should require a new audit by the MOC.
Yeah.
Sophie, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna barge in. Just the reason that this was on the agenda is that we talked about it in the channel and we agreed that, and I want to actually have a vote on this. Is the 1303 and the 1302, are they swappable? Do they require additional FCC certification? And is it okay for manufacturers to put in their HIP 19 the nomenclature SX 1302/3, meaning one or the other?
Yes, it's fully swappable. They only have the 03 only has the additional feature of fine time stamping. And what that means is it can add a high resolution timestamp as metadata to each and every packet coming out on the SPI bus. And that can be used by, if you had a solver that could solve location by triangulation or differential time of arrival. Helium doesn't use that at all. So yeah, from a performance point of view, that what we all care about, you can just swap them.
Helium doesn't currently use it. Maybe it could in the future, but there's also some 1303s out there that actually don't have the GPS part stuff.
Yes, exactly.
So they can't even do that.
No, exactly.
And the second question. Okay, so we're in agreement then that.
But Sophie, I just want to make sure that we're clear, right? So it's okay for a customer to say, I'm going to use either the 1302 or 3. And it doesn't trigger. They can swap those parts on their radio subsystem and they're fine. But they cannot jump from a 1301 or 8 to a 1302 or 3. That would trigger a whole new audit and new FCC testing.
Okay, understood. Next question is, we're only talking about FCC here, but does this also trigger a new CE?
Yes.
Etc.
Same thing. You can't change your radio design without getting a new certification. Like you can't change the chipset, your layout, any of that kind of stuff without going and triggering a new certification.
I got a layman's question here, because a lot of what you're saying, I can barely follow the numbers, but I get the gist of it. And I think the question I've got is what triggers an MOC decision on this? Is it this FCC thing? Is it CE thing? Is it something else? Because that's really, I think, what we're trying to set as a precedent for saying, hey, this is how we're dealing with these kinds of change outs. And it shouldn't be, maybe it should, up to us to be like, oh, I like the 1302, and so we'll go with that, and the 02 and the 03 are pretty close, so we'll go with that. Like, I'm thinking what we're looking for is like structural kind of guidance for this and in the future. Am I reading that right, or am I missing some important stuff?
But I think Felipe
Nick,
said we got it. We've already got.
I believe it's before you joined, Nick, but we did a list of triggers that would require re-audit. Reducing memory, reducing process, storage. I don't have the list by heart, and one of the items was anything that triggers a new radio certification.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is.
Yep.
We're certain it will trigger.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this up again because we have at least 2 manufacturers who said that they were selling one radio and are selling the 1308. So what do we do about those manufacturers in the future. For now, we've asked that they do a new audit, but
Yep.
we're going to be much more clear in the future when we communicate with manufacturers that they are not to do this.
Well, they can do it. They just need to submit for, they need to create like a V2 version of their product.
Mhm.
If you change the
Ahead
radio
of starting
system,
shipping it.
right? They should notify the MOC and say, look, we're moving to this new radio card design, and it's gonna, it has a new FCC ID, and so we're gonna resubmit, our for approval. And here's our updated test report that shows that module is FCC certified and that they carry the proper FCC ID for their module on their product.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it applies to CE too. You can't change the radio subsystem with new chipsets and not go trigger a new certification run.
And one last thing, Brad, the 1303, 1302, those do not require recertification?
No, the
Okay.
1302 and 3 are pin for pin compatible parts. From an RF perspective, they're identical. The only difference is, as Patrick said, that 1303, if you have a GPS connected, does fine time stamping. Now, and to even be clearer, you can do time stamping with a GPS on the 1302. You just don't get the fine time stamping.
Correct.
So, but if you choose to use a 1303, you might do it just because of supply chain, right? And that's a fair reason why you pick that part, and you don't populate the GPS. But if you're gonna, you're using the 1303 because you think you're getting an added feature, you better populate a GPS on that, because the only way that the feature improvement works is if you use the GPS precise timestamp.
Okay, so I think I could summarize this whole issue. We all agree the following. At all times, manufacturers have to submit to audit the design that they have, and it has to be approved by their regulatory body. So if you make a change that requires you to get new approval, you're going to also re-trigger a mock audit. And I think that's how it's going to happen. All those things have to go. So that's how we'll solve this one.
And if you're caught shipping a product that doesn't have the right radio subsystem that you said you were going to use and got approved, then you can be suspended, right? I think that's the fair. You can't do this, right? You can't just
we have to
swap
figure
out
out what
the
the
radio
action.
subsystem. Yeah,
exactly. But
I also want to be clear that for the last several months, that exact statement that you made, Jeremy, has been in our documentation. I realize we have probably too much documentation. I'm sorry to the manufacturers, but it is in the hardware specifications, that type of language.
Yeah. Is there anything left to really get resolved on this? I think our existing process is supposed to handle it, and we just, when we see this, we need to remind manufacturers that this is the rules. And
is there any requirement to notify the consumer?
That was a question I had too, which is I really do feel strongly that if you are going to tell consumers on your product documentation what you're shipping in there, it needs to be honest. So either don't talk about the concentrator you're shipping, or if you do, that becomes an actionable item people are going to buy on. It's like a consumer thing. It's just whatever you're telling people you're selling should be accurate. That's my opinion on that one. But I think we should sort of vote on that. That does get into that area of like trying to manage the consumer experience. But I think at least if you're going to tell the mock you're shipping something, you should be telling that's a tantamount to saying it publicly. Or if you're going to tell the customer you're shipping a certain thing, you're telling the mock that same thing. So don't be inaccurate.
Agreed. But the segmentation can get difficult. So with large volume. So I think maybe if the mock could accept that they could have a variable board design in the marking literature.
Well, yeah, if they're gonna have it be variable, it needs to say it in the literature. I think in one case, where the manufacturer said in their literature 1302 and actually did put a 1308. There's more questions on this item here. Are these from you, Sophie? Security. What does it say? Security element? No.
We can delete a lot of this.
Okay. All right. Did we get an actual vote on this? I don't think there's really anything that needed to vote. We're just clarifying our existing voting, really, right? What do you got, Christina?
The very next agenda item is actually in reference to kind of this issue. It's about whether or not there should be a fine for manufacturers who don't do the process and then go around and sell. So it kind of falls into the same category.
So far, we've never really had a fine structure set up. We've only done a suspension. I don't know if we want to paint ourselves in a corner about what should happen, but maybe we could leave it up to each case, how severe we think it is, and vote for what the action should be. Maybe the fine is you have to, stop selling it until it gets audited. I don't know. Up for discussion. Any ideas? And again, this is specifically what should happen to a manufacturer who has sold a model that was not actually approved.
So we currently charge an audit fee for the re-audit, or that's what we've done in the cases where the two manufacturers were discovered that they were selling something different.
Mhm.
I think doing it case by case makes a lot of sense rather than making a blanket fine for something that may just stop. That might be it. We might just have these two and that's it. I could argue that the audit fee could be higher for a, rather than a standard audit fee, but that perhaps we could discuss it as a case by case basis. And I like your suggestion that we ask the manufacturer to stop selling the units until after it's been audited, except that audits sometimes might be a month and a half. And
I think it's also important to say, in this case, we are talking about manufacturers who have been approved for one model. They've already been approved. This is not like someone who has just gone out and started selling without contacting the market at all, right? That is clearly something that, would be nearly impossible. But
we actually we have that now, don't we?
One suggestion, just for us to think about the cost of the audits. I think we could have two amounts. One thing, if it's the maker that submits for audit voluntarily, and then 5 times that price or something, if we are the ones having to force or request that this must be audited. Just an idea.
any other ideas?
One thing just to add in, not necessarily connected to that, is that when we find one of these manufacturers doing this, I think that should be something that is on the MOC to kind of broadcast to the world and to use the platform to say like, hey, this is what we found. We have this customer with this, whatever picture of their unit, and we figure out how are we going to prove that. And then say, hey, be advised that manufacturer B is supposed to be shipping product X, but you're actually receiving some of product Y. If we're the manufacturing oversight committee, I think that's within what we can do. And because we don't have any other tools to really leverage and say, other than some, smashing great fine or just completely cutting them off, which is a terrible tool. The publicity side of maybe requesting that Helium puts that in the announcement so that it just makes it painful for the manufacturers to try and get away with this.
Maybe, it's on me still to do what might become HIP 57. I've been lagging on it, but it is this token lockup idea. And maybe this becomes part of the token lockup. This is an actionable thing, can cause tokens to be destroyed. So I'm okay tabling a direct action for now and just saying we'll continue to use our existing process, which is, if it's egregious enough, we can shut off a manufacturer from staking. And maybe that is the negotiable part about how serious the end result is. But I think we all agree that it's not to be done. It is something that causes the MOC to look at you sternly and consider possibly suspending you if you do ship a model that was not approved. That's a current plan.
I feel like we could table this because it's not such a huge issue at this point.
We're okay with that? Okay. I think we're good. So apparently we have 2 versions, or we're considering, should we have 2 versions of the ethics doc is the question. Should we have one for manufacturers who are just consumer focused and another sort of B2B focused one? Or, well, I'm just reading from the notes here. Anybody want to take this one? This is
Yeah, I'll start it just so that someone watching this who doesn't have a technical background maybe understands a little bit more, is that it appears to be pretty reasonable to have two kind of separate groups of folks who sell hotspots. One group of entities who sell hotspot direct to the consumer or maybe through a distributor, but ends up going to a consumer. And then one group of manufacturers who will build and deploy hotspots for their own kind of giant network on the Helium piece, but they're not interested in selling to consumers at the endpoint. And so the question I believe we have is, should there be these different ethics that they have? Because some of the ethics side on selling direct to consumer may conflict with a manufacturer who's only going to build for themselves. I think that's right. If there's any corrections or updates, then yeah, jump in.
Yeah, Nick, I would just maybe add, I think there's kind of probably 3 or 4 types of suppliers we're seeing in the market. So I agree with your 2. I would just maybe drive another distinction in there. So I think there's clearly your kind of, direct to consumer companies like a Bobcat or maybe a Rack, right? And that's great. You need that. And my analogy here is like, think about like Wi-Fi systems. Like I can go to Best Buy, I buy a home router, but corporate IT departments buy a different, commercial grade router. And I think that's what's going to evolve in the Helium. So what I'd say is there's a tier of, what I'll say, communications equipment OEMs, right, who traditionally sell to kind of that enterprise and network operator market. Curlink is probably the example that's public in the Helium community right now. That's their traditional customer base. They don't sell direct to consumer. They sell to other network operators and businesses. For those guys, one distinction I would make is they typically don't run their fleet. So I think that's a distinction in terms of how we think about how this works. Like a Rack or a Bobcat is managing their fleet by nature because they're selling to individuals who don't have any capability to manage a fleet and don't want to manage a fleet. But like somebody selling to an enterprise, a communications equipment company selling to an enterprise market, their customers may buy hundreds or thousands of these, and in a lot of cases, their customers want to manage that fleet. So we need to, in my mind, think about like who's actually building the hardware product, certifying it, doing all that kind of stuff, but then who actually manages the fleet after it's deployed. And then the one that you mentioned, which is still another category, is what I'll call closed system deployments. So these are companies who have usually an IoT solution that they're deploying. So it could be the traditional like smart city stuff or utilities, and those solutions get deployed kind of with gateways that support the network because of the SLA requirements. So in that case, those gateways are never for general sale. You get those gateways only if you buy like that whole smart city package from that IoT company. So those are kind of the 3. And in that case, again, it's a question of who manages the fleet. It could be the solutions provider, the smart city company doing like that whole package, or it could actually be the city that says, I want to manage the fleet. So those are the different scenarios at play. But and maybe I'm going a little bit too broad, but I think the question at hand was, is there any concern for a closed ecosystem deployment where a company designs a gateway, it's supporting an IoT use case, and you just the general population can never go buy that gateway unless they buy that whole system solution?
The first immediate thing I can think of, just generally, like we've built this system, or we're expecting the system to really be highly distributed and Sybil resistant, meaning no one entity has control over POC easily. When we have distributed actors of it, if you have a high concentration of gateways owned by one entity, there's a lot easier chances for cheating. You just control a lot of it. POC itself is kind of dependent on all gateways independently verifying each other's locations. And if you just own a ton of gateways, there's no incentive for you to actually deploy them in certain areas. So that's my one worry, is that if we tend to focus on selling to customers directly in small batches, we have a hope that lots of different people will have them. But I think, on the other hand, we're going to need to understand that anybody can buy any gateway whenever. They could go collect them up from retail customers in large batches. You can't really control it.
Dagan, I've got 2 questions for Sophie and for Jameson. Sophie, do you remember what the specific ethics kind of issue was that there was a difference between the 2? And then Jameson, I'm super interested to hear what you have to say about this topic.
I didn't put the agenda item.
I can add into that
Yep.
because it was it was somebody that I had spoke to that is just starting the HIP 19 process, and they were basically, there were two sections of it that were specifically asking about listing like their numbers on their website for their deployments and like when the batches were going to come out. But they're working with distributors. That's their plan, is to work with distributors, so they wouldn't actually be the one, shipping and handling that kind of things. So that was their question, is if that could be changed or modified to be them, because they're not going to be an end use seller.
So Jeremy, I think this also ties back to your token lock concept, which I'm totally in support of. But in my mind, the person who we want to go do that is the person who's deploying and managing the fleet. So in these different scenarios, that's not always what we would generally call as the gateway manufacturer who's seeking.
Cool, thanks. We're back up.
So is there a way to make that work where we basically say, look, if you're a hardware manufacturer and you're selling 1,000-unit lots of these gateways to these customers who are going to deploy and manage that fleet, it's your customer that really should come and seek an onboarding key, so that we can see that fleet, because then it makes it very easy to distinguish who's in that fleet and who's not, and you can see like, is there some behavior that's questionable, and I think that works in the closed ecosystem environment too. If it's a legitimate smart city IoT deployment, you might have 50 of these kind of LoRa gateways across the city. You wouldn't see a concentration of 1,000 in two city blocks or something like that, right? But that way you get visibility to who's running fleets, and the community can go look and say, these are all the groups of gateways out there, and you may or may not, we can debate like, should it be public? Like maybe that should be, like, if you get an onboarding key, it has to be public, so then the community can observe your fleet, and as long as you're deploying legitimately, that's great. There's no concern.
Jameson, what do you got, dog?
No, I like what Brad had to say. I think the best way to mitigate bad or malevolent actors is transparency and sunlight. So if you're able to identify where there are concentrations of devices on a single wallet, that's going to give the community the best ability to audit the performance of those devices. Ethics is such a big topic. I think from my side, if you're selling to a consumer, you do have a higher ethical obligation to be transparent and communicative to the consumer. But that's not necessarily about, I think, what we're trying to address here, which is people gaming the hotspots for token rewards and spoofing the network. And for that, to mitigate it, I think, the best ability is to have transparency. So to help people identify where the aggregate power is in the network and police them, because people are doing it. I mean, we all have seen it. They're posting when they identify what looks to be fishy deployments. So that would be my take.
Felipe, what do you got, dog?
Yeah, two things regarding what Brad was saying. We've been talking several times, and I think it's a path that we will have to follow, about having the OEM branding with one company doing the actual design, etc., manufacturing, but then being the last one, the one that actually sells the product, to apply for the maker key. Because of course the wallet will be of the end client, but it will give us a more intermediate measure. If I am selling these units and I am the one managing the fleet, even if I buy the designs and if it's manufactured by a Bobcat, a rack, or whatever, if I'm the one branding it as selling it to the public, I should be the one having to apply for the maker key and to manage that process. That will give us control to avoid the gaming by itself.
Got it. And then to Christina's original point about the customer who said that they didn't want to release certain pieces of information, maybe, I forget what it was, Christina's, like how much money they had in the bank or how much they'd made, something like that. It sounds like maybe there's room for 3 separate ethics documents, one for the DTC, the direct consumer, one for the, like a white label kind of thing, who might be making a ton for someone else, and one for a closed circuit system. Is that right? Or is that extra complication?
Just one more idea, maybe 3 different documents or one document with some subsections on the parts that are different. Otherwise, we'll end up with a ton of documents. I think we should aim to have one ethic document, and then for the scenarios that change, we just have some addendas or whatever with the details of that part. But please, I think we should keep it in one single document.
Oh, sorry, Jeremy, I'm agreeing with you, and then I'll be quiet. I think to your point earlier, Jeremy, the risk point is people who control large numbers, of units that are deployed. So that's the common theme, and so we just need to be clear about, how do you identify people who are trying to deploy large numbers? Most of them are legitimate. They shouldn't have an issue stepping forward publicly saying, "Look, I'm planning to deploy 10,000 of these things," right? And just from there, it's just like, how do they get them? They can design it themselves and build them, right? They can buy them from an existing manufacturer. They can go to like an ODM one and that's got most of the design done, and they take it the last step.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I really am in favor of one ethics doc. And really, if you think about ethics, they are models of behavior that should apply to everyone. So it shouldn't really, we should be able to craft this in a way that we don't really have to have different ethics for different actors. It just, right? It should be, how do we say, egalitarian enough that it just talks about the behaviors we expect.
I think Felipe nailed it. Is we have one set of ethics, and then there are different requirements for different kind of styles of actors. So if you've got one,
and scenarios,
other people. Yep. Yeah. Perfect.
In this situation, what we ethically expect is this. In that situation, what we expect is that.
Right. Or when you have more power, you have a higher ethical obligation.
I think that one may be harder to, I guess in the sense that ethics is ultimately what we judge things on a case-by-case basis, and the actions that we end up taking as the mock. The more
I was
power you have,
thinking
possibly.
more for malevolent actors in the network.
Right, but it's hard for us to enforce an ethics doc.
Yes, yeah.
Right. We can come up with whatever things we say should happen. Ultimately, the only point of the ethics doc is to talk about what the mock is likely to do when they see certain behaviors. It's ultimately what this ends up saying.
Jeremy, that's what triggered the creation of the ethics document, was to give us a base in order to say, hey, we told you, it's explicit, you cannot do this kind of behavior, so the penalty will be this. Exactly. So we have basis to act on bad actors.
Are we generally in consensus that having unified doc and just getting things split out? I think, Sophie, you gave it a thumbs up?
I'm okay.
Ambivalent.
Writing it in the notes, actually. Nick, would you write the 3 scenarios that
I'm on it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Oh wait, no, go down to where the thing is, Nick.
So we have another item in here that I think we just kind of talked about, which Brad, was the guidance on companies planning to build binary for closed system. We sort of did that just now, right?
I think it's the same thing. I think it's very simple. Like there's got to be visibility to people deploying large numbers, large fleets, and how does that visibility come through the HIP process and the onboarding key approvals? That's really what we have to resolve.
Do we have to resolve that now? I think
I think Nick's going to outline the 3 scenarios, which I think include the scenario I highlighted. And then we just need to, so one of the questions, and Jeremy, probably defer to you since you have the most experience, like what's the overhead to having more legal entities, right? Because these would all be some kind of company that would want to deploy these larger fleets, getting their own onboarding key and managing that. I think that's the implication to the manageability from a DY perspective. You might have a lot more people now that have, an onboarding key.
The overhead is relatively small. Just the chain gang goes and does a transaction update, which changes the variables and adds a new key to the staking, allowed staking keys. Very little chain mechanics required. I do think though that something that we should put in the ethics doc is that onboarding keys, the staking keys, are very important assets, and you need to guard them. They need to be like, it cannot have a lot of people in your organization having access to that. In fact, right now we do have it locked up in the onboarding server, so you don't even see it.
Yeah. Well, again, just, and we can talk about this offline and clarify, but in my view, it's the large fleet deployers that should all have their own unique key. I'm totally fine to ask a fleet deployer to put up HNT tokens as insurance, as you've already talked about. And that kind of pays, it's kind of like there's an audit fee that people pay to get hardware audited. There should be a fee for fleet deployers that pay to basically go through the application approval process of getting their own onboarding key. And we should set a guideline. Like if you're running more than, I don't know if the number is 1,000, 100 hotspots, then you should come forward and get your own onboarding key so that your fleet becomes visible.
Yeah, I think I'm totally fine with that. I think in all cases though, an audit's required. We're going to go through the audit process because we're going to audit the way the security mechanism.
Well, but if they're already buying hotspots that's already approved from a manufacturer, then it's really, we just need to clarify that the chain of trust is delivered from the manufacturer to the customer who actually has the onboarding. But they'll be building in batches anyhow. So.
Let me get Felipe in first here, and then I'm going to ask you another question.
I was just, it's a different thing, but we only have control of the key assigned to a maker. And that maker has 1, 2, eventually 20 models of devices being shipped and produced. We have currently no way to do any kind of modular control. I was thinking maybe we will need one day, let's say a scenario where we need to stop a maker from shipping a certain model of device. Would that mean we would need to have one key per model, or how do you guys think this could? I'm trying to think ahead, but we're starting to have different models, and we're starting to have issues with makers that have been approved, and now they have issues with certain models. Might be good to think about how we can control model by model instead of just the whole maker.
I can answer the mechanics of that, but that's a longer conversation. One is, should we do it? Can we do it? And there are changes in the works that may even make it impossible for us to control at that level, which is that, at some point we were talking about giving manufacturers their own onboarding servers, making them run them, which means they will be in charge of their keys completely. One of the magic situations we had with Codex is that we still have the centralized DY onboarding server, and Codex never had the keys. We're able to actually reinstate them, but not give them their onboarding keys so that we can then control which specific units got onboarded. That's going to be even tougher when we give the keys over. So I think we may have to kind of table that one, or at least it's a longer discussion if we need that. We'll burn that bridge when we get to it. It's my favorite saying. I feel like we digressed a little bit though. Brad, you and I were.
No. I think I've made my observations and just the way I see the market landscape. So I mean, we can take these offline. And
I think anybody's open to apply as a HIP 19 manufacturer. If you're closed circuit, I think is what we're kind of calling this system. You can get an onboarding key, a staking key. If you're using existing hotspots, though, it will be rather difficult for you to use your staking key with existing hotspots that have been onboarded already. The public address is already in there, so it's impossible. But for new units, they might manufacture.
Exactly, and I think the guidance to the traditional manufacturers are: look, if you have a customer that's coming to you wants to buy 5,000, 10,000 of these things, whatever it may be, you should encourage them to go get their own key, because you don't want to carry the liability for that fleet, right? This way, it's the person who's actually deploying the units or selling the units, that final step, that basically assumes the liability for what they deploy, and it's visible and measurable. And it can even be measurable because people use different like as this evolves, people are not going to have the same hardware from the same manufacturer in their fleet. They'll buy units from this manufacturer this year, and next year this guy's got a better unit or better price. He's going to so really the actual hardware in these fleets is going to become manufacturer heterogeneous, and this way you still get clarity to the fleet, which is what we want, because that's where the most likely abuse could happen.
I like this idea. It's a market pressure that puts the manufacturer's going to push for it. You know, the original manufacturer's going to push for it. What
Exactly.
to call that. It doesn't require us to tell them to do anything, and it's just basically saying we are open to you getting your own staking key if you have large numbers of deployments. It actually helps identify the owner of that gateway in a way that wasn't possible on chain. So I think it's an easy thing to say. Yes, that's we all agree that's possible. But
Sure.
the bigger question is how do you audit for that? I think that's what we're going to have to discuss on channel. It's just how to make it work. Any serious objections to that idea? Again, everybody understand what we're proposing? Is that if you want to deploy a large number of hotspots, you can apply to get your own staking key. We would encourage you to do so. Cool.
Do we define a large number?
I don't know. That's the thing is, it could be any number, I suppose.
Let's
No,
do
that
that
doesn't make any
async.
sense.
Otherwise, we end up with like
Yeah.
throwing out a number here that ends up being wrong. But I think that's one of the first starting questions, right?
Yep. Also consider too, we can't really enforce how many you end up shipping in the end. Once you give you a staking key, you can onboard any number. So that's a big thing that I have to consider. It's not quite as controllable as I think it is. All right, I think we've gone through basically the direct to consumer versus the closed circuit model, and that fixes this next item. Coco, you have an agenda item here talking about chain variables being put
Hi.
to Helium vote.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. So this came up because PyCom's maker account got created today, and sort of the final step to get a maker being able to let their customers add their hotspots to the blockchain is the addition of their maker account address to the staking key chain variable. I think a couple of weeks ago, the core team decided that every chain variable change should be put up to a Helium vote so that nothing is sort of introduced without sort of the community consensus. This is kind of an interesting way of looking at voting on makers by the community after the MOC vote. So I just wanted to get everyone's pulse on what they think we should include in the Helium vote.
Yeah,
Maybe the
let me
original
provide more
PIP
context
application. Yeah.
here too. So again, this is like a technical level thing. The way we control certain things in the blockchain is these chain variable updates. And that means whenever we approve a new manufacturer, what actually happens is the chain gang updates a specific variable called the stake payer keys. I don't know the name of the exact variable, but they're
underscore key chain bar.
there we go. That variable gets updated. And that's really when we vote to approve a manufacturer, that's how it gets done. Conversely, the chain gang has said, you know what, really, in the interest of making this decentralized and having most community input, all chain variable updates should be put to a vote. That's what they're saying. And that means ultimately our decisions would need to be voted on in a Helium vote. Like when we say to add a manufacturer to the chain, then it has to go for vote. I don't know if that was an oversight or if that was intended by the chain gang, but that's basically what they're asking. Felipe.
I basically love the idea. No, it's for decentralization because we do the preliminary filtering. Okay, we do the preliminary check if some applicant that made the HIP 19, the KYC checks up, the audit is okay, and then we already filter the applicants to join the ecosystem, but then the end word will become of the community, if I'm understanding this correctly. So we can, if we say no to or we block a process, it dies there. But even if we approve a maker to join, then he still has to go to a second round of voting by the whole community, and it will, in the end, it will be the community itself to approve or not that to join. For decentralization and clarity, personally, I love the concept.
Again, I can provide a similar analogy. It's almost like we are now the legislature in the American system of government, and the community becomes the president, and the president can veto a bill. Can't create a bill. Only we as the committee can approve a manufacturer, but the community can vote it down. My only worry here is just how long that might take if that puts extra delays that we don't think should be in the system. But at first I thought, oh, this is crazy. Maybe we should do it. But now I'm
happy
saying
to talk about, yeah, I'm happy to talk about the timing.
Yeah.
No, we shouldn't. Normally, HIP votes run for at least a week. I don't think we need to make it quite as long for manufacturers, maybe 2 days, 2.5 days. And we will, I want to talk about next is like what type of information or data should we present to the community so that they can make an informed decision. So I think that should be up for discussion with the MOC. But the voting is pretty simple. The question posed is, should we allow this maker to be an official manufacturer and add their hotspots to the blockchain? And the two choices are for and against. And how the voting works is it's by vote power. If you're not familiar with the HIP voting, basically you submit a burn transaction from a wallet bearing HNT or staked HNT. And whatever you vote for at the end of the vote, it looks at how much HNT is in your account. It doesn't take your HNT, it just counts how much HNT is in your account, and that is your vote power. And the total tally of HNT for each decision will be the final decider of whether one decision is made or not.
Dig it. Oh, go ahead, Coco. Sorry, I didn't know you were finished.
The deciding factor is, the final vote for or against has to be a 66% majority. That was the last thing I wanted to say.
Brad?
Sure, I'll jump on it. So my question is, it's more like the HIP or the voting mechanism is there a way for a large manufacturer to basically squash all other manufacturers from coming in because they have so much HNT?
Yeah, that was exactly the question I was going to ask. I mean, it's a bit of a sci-fi kind of movie plot thing, but I mean, if this was approved in theory, large manufacturers could pool, or them and their customers could pool enough votes to vote this down.
It is the case. I mean,
That already applies
also
to any vote that's going through the system.
Let me also, in the spirit of debate, talk about some cons or some reasons we could say, look, the mock was actually formed to control this particular variable. Maybe this variable is grandfathered in as, well, the community does have a say in this through the mock, in a sense, or we've been taking from the community. Maybe this is carved out and this does not have to be under that. That's the alternative way of saying this as well. But
to use your politics analogy, we're like the Supreme Court.
That also writes law from the bench, almost, in a sense. Yes. No easy answer. I think the danger of manufacturers colluding together to shut one out might be pretty low. We actually don't really know who controls H&T by power.
Could you make it just a majority vote instead of take the power part out? Just one vote per, because that it would make it more democratic.
But then you can create a ton of wallets and vote with each different wallet. If I have 1,000 HNT, I put one.
Hang on, let's see what Jameson's got to say. He's got his hand up. He's following the rules, unlike the rest of us.
I think the project has achieved sufficient decentralization. So this risk was significant in the early stages. It's less so now. If there is a way to identify, the origin of currency holding or the position of the currency in the network, whether it's staked or in a wallet, you might be able to imply further decentralization from location of the currency or where it's being used, but I wouldn't be concerned personally. The law of large numbers and decentralization
And the
unlikely
amount
that
of
we could
they-
also-
HAT they would have to actually tilt the direction would be crazy.
That's
I
right.
think with the size of the network we have now, the amount of HNT out there, it's not that easy. Particularly, you must have 66%. So
Coach, let me ask Coach a question. What happens if the threshold, if neither approve nor deny reaches a 66%, if it's 50-50? It's not approved?
No, it doesn't go through.
Okay, so it has to be approved at 66% to
Uh-huh.
Well,
Brad.
and would this apply to new products from existing manufacturers? So if there's a new model coming out from XYZ manufacturer, would they have to go through the vote? Or is it only?
Because their maker key is still the same.
yeah, it's not a change in the chain variable.
Correct.
So would we make the existing approved manufacturers go back through this process to continue?
Good question. Before I answer that, I do want to say that for, nope, I take it back.
We could argue that, hey, that's not a change. We're saying henceforth, any changes to the variables need to be voted on. Therefore, everyone's grandfathered in.
You know, what would be, I wonder if maybe we will sort of open Pandora's box. Why don't we leave it up to community and ask if they want to do a revote on the existing manufacturers?
So a
And
vote to
what's
whether there shall be
possi-
future votes.
But wait, you're talking about making a vote regarding the current manufacturers, if they are allowed in or not. That means that we could have a situation we would have to revoke a maker's key from an existing maker.
That is the question I am posing.
All right.
I believe that's a
we-
Pandora's box.
Maybe we can table this for now, but we should make this a high priority thing to talk about. Ultimately, it's kind of a little bit out of our hands. If the community does decide to do this, then it's really not our decision. So I think we've got enough in here. Let's try to squeeze in one more thing. Nick has got to get going. So we have a question about what is the time frame for manufacturers to reapply who have not been approved? Oh, I see. The basic idea is if we, one of the things that we have done as the mock is to make certain that manufacturers don't spend a lot of energy and money applying when we think we know we're not going to vote them in. So you catch them earlier in the process because we started to get a little bit more stringent about who we think is going to be good for the network and who isn't. And so what happens in the case where we deny upfront a manufacturer because we don't feel good about them? Should they be allowed to reapply, and how much time should they wait? Should there be a process in time? So that's the item for discussion. Anybody with strong feelings? Sophie, this is kind of your question, right? Did you feel this adequately?
Yeah, it's come up in general through the DY. I do have an opinion though, which is that, of course, I have an opinion. I think that manufacturers absolutely should be allowed to reapply, just because you can't tell people, okay, one and done, unless they've done something absolutely egregious. But if they've just applied and they're not a good fit, say for the reason that they've never manufactured LoRa before, or LoRaWAN, or they're just not a good fit in the manufacturing reason, we should allow them to reapply. And I'll just throw a number at it. It should be more than 6 months and less than a year, in my opinion.
Well, just more than 6 months. It doesn't have to be less, just more than 6 months.
Yeah.
So if you apply, you can't apply again for 6 months. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I'm okay with that as a generalization. Let's get it.
Using Jeremy's comparison with the courts, basically you can be retried if anything, any of the evidence changes. So if if they provide a big difference on what they proposed after 6 months, they apply again.
But the general consensus, 6 months seems to be, you've got to wait 6 months before reapplying. I'm okay with that.
Yep.
Just to
Any more?
clarify, my less than a year was about the KYC process, but I take it back. I take
Oh,
it
I
back.
see what you're saying. You're talking about
Yeah.
the KYC goes stale.
Just extra labor to go through the documents again and So I would say the documents are good for a year.
Okay, you're saying if they can reapply after 6 months without having to go through the whole KYC. If they reapply after 12 months, they have actually to start the whole process and do the KYC from scratch. Is that it, Sophie?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Documents expire. Businesses expire. I'm not sure what the date should be.
Yeah, I'm even worried about 6 months, right? A lot changes in 6 months, particularly with these kind of startup companies or companies entering the market. So
Maybe we just say 6 months. You
6
after-
months,
That's
and
what-
it's the process from scratch.
Yeah. Yep.
that's what I.
That may be easier. We can always change as it gets too onerous, or we think it's getting too crazy, but at least putting something in stone for the timing, in soft stone, sandstone.
Right.
But that's pretty easy for manufacturers. If they already have that folder and all the things are no different, then it's super easy for them to kind of submit and for us to double check. So I think that 6 months full, like new application is totally fine.
Okay, this is officially do it. Brad, you're okay with this? Yes or no? Brad, thumbs up. I'm thumbs up. Patrick, what do you got? I think we reached enough for consensus. Okay, we have officially voted on that. So, all right, we've got 2 minutes left officially. Should we just pat ourselves in the back for finishing earlier, or really any last minute items that we did not get to, or anybody feel really strongly that we missed something? We are going to go back into the channel and talk about this chain variable vote thing. I think that is an important thing for us to go on. And Christina, if you can help remind us to do that. And thank you, Christina, for all of the, what should I say, herding the cats is my favorite analogy that you have done for us amongst all the other things that you do, communicating with the manufacturers and helping them understand what needs to be done. Yeah, thank you. Great. Well, thank you also, Jameson, for attending your first time as an onboarding member. Appreciate it. And we will see everyone on the network and here next month.
Let's.
See you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Sayonara.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.